Chapter 7. Addiction 2.0. Monetizing Compulsive Behavior in the Digital Age. 3 out of 4 regular caffeine users are addicted to the substance. 1 out of 8 people worldwide is addicted to nicotine. Addiction is big business. Even after the lawsuits, the public awareness, and the increasingly graphic Surgeon General's warnings, in 2018, the tobacco industry's annual global revenue still surpassed $500 billion. But cigarettes are only part of the first generation of addictive products, and in a way, they play nice. Consumers can touch, feel, and taste products that contain nicotine. They know the potential for addiction up front, so they can make an informed decision. There's a newer wave of addictive products that do not provide these niceties. Thanks to technology, companies no longer need a substance like nicotine to get you addicted. And unlike the companies selling coffee and cigarettes, this second wave doesn't want you to pay for the product. At least, not with money. Instead, they want you to pay with your time and focus. Your attention has become the currency itself. Welcome to Addiction 2.0. In a very real sense, our time is money. Popular platforms like Instagram and Facebook are free of charge in the classic sense, but we pay for them indirectly through our attention. There's no return policy for losing 3 hours binge-watching or right-swiping or feed surfing. The longer a site or app can keep you online and the higher your engagement, the more advertisements it can sell. In this time-on-site business model, the longer a platform can keep users active, the more advertising revenue it can generate. The companies operating in this space love to use the term engagement, but that's really just a euphemism for addiction. And for a company that thrives on the attention of its users, what could possibly be more desirable than a platform to which users are literally addicted? Your attention is for sale, and it's worth billions. And the way these platforms monetize our attention is through digital advertising. Companies pay platforms like Snapchat, Instagram, and Pinterest to access their users, the same way companies used to pay to advertise in newspapers and magazines. Since the early 2000s, digital advertising has ballooned into a massive industry. More than $72 billion was spent on digital ads in 2016 in the U.S. alone, with $10 billion of that going to Facebook, where users spend on average about 50 minutes a day. And while Facebook currently stands at the top of the pack, it is of course not alone in this fiercely competitive new attention economy. Platforms that compete in the attention economy, some of which have social element and some of which don't, compete for our attention and the ad dollars that follow. Americans spend over 3 hours a day on their cell phones, with the average Snapchat user opening the app an alarming 18 times a day. As a result, companies that operate in this space are some of the most profitable organizations in human history, despite having no physical product that the consumer buys and takes home. Consider the top 5 most visited websites in the U.S. as of October 2019. Google, YouTube, Facebook, Amazon, and Reddit. Only one on that list, Amazon, has an actual product or service that consumers pay for. The customer has become the product. Companies are now buying and selling us. Social media companies in particular have come under heavy pressure recently for simply being too good at operating within the attention economy. They have successfully converged on technological features that exploit psychological vulnerabilities in pursuit of profit. Online platforms have the unique distinction of being the only industry in which its most influential creators are simultaneously its most vocal critics. Facebook's first president, Sean Parker, Google Gchat creator Justin Rosenstein, and many other original technocrats have sounded the alarm about how these platforms rob us of our attention and hijack our psychology. Even Steve Jobs, a godlike figure in the world of technology, famously limited the use of iPhones and iPads in his own home. Mark Benioff, CEO of Salesforce, said on record, "I think that, for sure, technology has addictive qualities that we have to address, and that product designers are working to make those products more addictive, and we need to rein that back." What all of today's addictive technologies have in common is their success at tapping into something fundamental, the experience of pleasure itself, and using it to drive users to behave the way the platform wants. To understand addiction, We need to dive even deeper into pleasure, not just what it feels like, but how it shapes us. Pleasure and behavior. We saw in the last chapter how our experience of pleasure is a key part of our decision-making. Pleasure is also inextricably linked to our behavior, including, at the worst of times, compulsive behavior. Let's start with the basics. The simplest way in which the experience of pleasure can drive our actions is through behavioral reinforcement. If we go to a new restaurant and enjoy a delicious meal, our brain learns there is a relationship between going to the restaurant and pleasure, so we naturally seek to return to the restaurant soon. Our enjoyment of the meal reinforces the behavior of going to the restaurant. Experimental psychologist B.F. Skinner pioneered the science of reinforcement learning, which he termed operant conditioning, at Harvard in the 1960s. The general mechanism is incredibly intuitive. Every dog owner knows that having a stash of tasty treats is key to shaping the behavior of a new pup. Rover relieves himself outside instead of on the floor. Give him a tasty treat. Rover sits on command. Give him a tasty treat. And so on. Over time, Rover slowly learns a relationship between his actions and these delicious reinforcements. Like dog owners, technology companies like Apple, Facebook, and Google are in the business of shaping behavior to keep users on sites as long as possible. Could their addictive nature be as simple as behavioral reinforcement? Are we all refreshing our Facebook news feeds to get the tasty treats of entertainment and social gratification? Recent data from the mobile app Moment suggests that this is not the case. Moment tracks application use on smartphones, including which apps consume the most of their users' time. Weekly, they ask users which apps they enjoy using the most and compare this with their actual usage. If simple reinforcement drove behavior, we'd find that the most pleasure-inducing apps would be the most popular and well-subscribed. But in fact, the opposite is true. An aggregate report of 2017 data shows that a higher amount of time spent on an app is consistently associated with unhappiness. The apps we use most often are the ones we enjoy the least, and the ones we wish we spent less time on. Though to be honest, this should be obvious to anyone who has looked at the person across from them on the bus or subway as they stare endlessly into their phone. The facial expression of the now classic mindless Instagram scroll falls far short of pure ecstasy. Clearly, something more complex is at work than simple behavioral reinforcement, which isn't surprising, really. For organizations that spend billions of dollars to shape our behavior, simple operant conditioning is mere child's play. Were Facebook a dog trainer, it would make Cesar Millan the dog whisperer look like a kindergartner. And what separates the everyday dog owner from elite animal trainers isn't how much reinforcement is given, it's the manner in which it's given. Pleasure and dopamine. Recall from Chapter 6 that the experience of pleasure is quirky. Our experience of it is fleeting in nature, optimized for its pursuit, not its acquisition. We enjoy it more when it's random and unpredictable. Feeling pleasure is crucially important to us, but we're generally bad at predicting how much pleasure we may experience in the future. There are also several quirks to how pleasure shapes our behavior. And all of these quirks have to do with how the brain processes pleasurable experiences. Scientists also know quite a lot about what pleasure looks like in the brain because of a specific region near its center, also discussed in Chapter 1, called the nucleus accumbens. When this area is stimulated directly using deep brain electrodes, people report feeling good. When monkeys are given the choice to press a button that stimulates the nucleus accumbens via such electrodes, they will do this to the point of exhaustion, choosing this self-stimulation over food, water, and even sex. When you stimulate the nucleus accumbens in people with severe clinical depression, those beyond the help of psychiatric medication, who have muscular atrophy due to a lack of smiling, it produces a smile on their faces. In other words, the nucleus accumbens is as close to a pleasure center as there is. It proves to be a keen fortune teller as well. Researcher Greg Burns and colleagues wanted to see if they could predict the success of pop songs. During the experiment, they examined brain activity in test subjects as they heard a new pop song for the first time. Pleasure proved to be a reliable predictor of the song's success. The more the nucleus accumbens fired during listening, the more popular the song turned out to be when it was released to the general public. Fascinatingly, people's subjective reports of how much they enjoyed a given song didn't correlate with its eventual success at all. Our nucleus accumbens reveals our deep enjoyment of popular guilty pleasures like Despacito, Nickelback, Backstreet Boys, and Drake. The nucleus accumbens contains a high concentration of neurons that communicate via dopamine, millions of them in fact. Given this, dopamine is often called the pleasure molecule. But dopamine is more nuanced than that. Recall from the previous chapter that your brain is always driving either towards something, pleasure, or away from something, pain. Dopamine is the key player in the drive towards something. It is the want molecule. If you've ever felt the joy of anticipation, that is your brain releasing dopamine. What dopamine is not is the have molecule, meaning your brain releases dopamine when you want something, or more specifically when you anticipate it, but not once you've acquired it. Dopamine responds to the sizzle, not the steak. Dopamine is one of the primary reasons why wanting and pleasure are biologically distinct. Dr. Daniel Z. Lieberman and Michael E. Long, in their book dedicated to dopamine, The Molecule of More, do an excellent job of distilling this. Dopaminergic excitement, that is, the thrill of anticipation, doesn't last forever, because eventually the future becomes the present. The thrilling mystery of the unknown becomes the boring familiarity of the everyday, at which point dopamine's job is done, and a letdown sets in. Think about electronic music genres like dubstep and electro house that feature a lot of build-ups and drops. The build-up is as enjoyable as it is tense. This was taken to hilarious extremes in the Saturday Night Live skit titled When Will the Bass Drop?, where an electro house song builds for what feels like eternity until it eventually crescendos to the long-anticipated drop, at which point the tension is finally released. This is exactly how dopamine works. The more you anticipate something occurring in the future, the higher dopamine climbs. The anticipation of pleasure is intrinsically rewarding to your brain. It would be accurate to call dopamine the future molecule, but calling it the drop the bass molecule is more fun. Think about how these principles play out in dining. Taste, via the tongue, is only the proverbial tip of the iceberg when it comes to the pleasure of a good meal. What lies beneath is anticipation and expectation. This is particularly true of new food and wine pairings. You have a general impression that the food and wine will taste good together. But having never had this combination before, you can't know for sure. This positive but uncertain feeling leads you to anticipate that future pleasure. When a sommelier pairs a bottle of Côte du Rhône with your lamb dish, say a gigot d'agneau pleureur, the mental machinery of anticipation kicks in. Without a single taste of either, you are already experiencing pleasure. We experience dopamine based on anticipation, but we get an extra kick when our expectations are exceeded. This is why random pleasures are the best pleasures. Pairing red wine with red meat is fairly predictable. What if we instead order a fusion dish like, say, a Nutella lasagna? Unlike the wine pairing, we don't have a context for Nutella plus lasagna. Solely because it is new to us, the pleasure we get from anticipating it is already higher than it would have been with the wine pairing. The brain also sets a level of expectation for the dish. The more handsomely something exceeds our expectations, the more pleasure we experience. When the lack of context for Nutella lasagna is met with a surprisingly delicious result, a surge of dopamine is released into your brain, amplifying the pleasure. It's the pleasure we don't predict and that we anticipate the most that gives us the strongest mouthgasms. This also helps explain why pleasure is inherently fleeting in nature, why once we have experienced something and therefore have informed expectations for what that experience is like, the joy we derive from it can fade. Anyone who has been on a tropical vacation knows this all too well. Lying on the beach sipping Mai Tais is heavenly at first, but even the nicest white sand beaches get old after a few days. Sooner or later, you need to experience something else before you can enjoy the beach again. And what is at play here is a phenomenon called attenuation, or the tendency for a psychological experience such as emotion or attention to fade naturally over time. When it comes to pleasure, this phenomenon may be hardwired into us by evolution. Bliss is simply not a sustainable state. With enough repetition, even bacon gets boring. Pleasure, prediction, and surprise. We are constantly making predictions about what's coming next. If we go to a restaurant, we're predicting how good the food is going to be. If we think the food is going to be so-so, but it ends up being amazing, this is what scientists call a positive prediction error. You were wrong, but in a good way. That happy error, as you just learned, launches dopamine into action. We love to be positively surprised. And one common strategy for building in this kind of positive surprise is to carefully manage expectations. Seeing Zappos employees at your front door with a pair of free gloves is pleasurable, in large part because you didn't expect it to happen. In fact, if a consumer experience doesn't exceed our expectations, we're likely to move on, seeking out new pleasures. Hence the business idiom, under-promise and over-deliver. Zappos' success has been built on employing this, especially early on, in their shipping strategy. Before Amazon bought it, Zappos was a scrappy startup. It was one of the first companies to prove to the world people are willing to buy shoes online. Online shoppers during the early years of e-commerce associated it with slow delivery. 4 to 5 business days was the established expectation. Zappos deliberately chose to ship items using 2-day delivery without telling their customers. Why? Because the customers expected to see their Nikes in a week, and when this expectation was violated with a 2-day delivery, the joy of receiving new Nikes was amplified by surprise. Zappos isn't alone in using expectation to craft positive experiences for its customers. Imagine your flight is scheduled to arrive in San Diego at 2:30 p.m., but over the intercom, the captain giddily announces that she'll be arriving at 2 p.m. instead. Everyone on the airplane is happy. Ever wonder why your airline seems to arrive early a little too often? Well, so did researchers at the Kellogg School of Business. The researchers found that published flight times had increased over 8% in the past 20 years. But this increase was due not to changes in the time it actually takes to get from point A to point B. Rather, they found that this extra time was strategic padding. Airlines intentionally reported flight times as being longer than expected so that they could positively surprise customers in flight when they announced the early arrival time, which was actually the real estimated arrival time all along. On time or ahead of schedule flight arrivals result in happy customers. And our idea about what is on time or ahead of schedule has everything to do with the expectations that are set. This approach has its limitations, however. If an airline surprises its customers by being exactly 10 minutes early each and every time, people catch on. The next time they go on a flight, their expectations will have shifted. Their prediction error, therefore their level of enjoyment, will be smaller, thanks to their elevated expectations. Dopamine is what lets us recalibrate our expectations. With each additional data point regarding our anticipated pleasure versus our actual pleasure, our prediction error narrows. Dopamine is crucially involved not only in the anticipation of pleasure, but in learning about pleasure and when we can expect it. Oprah and over-delivering. How do you apply under-promise and over-deliver to people with extremely high standards? How, for example, would you pull this off for a party you're hosting for, say, the Obamas or Oprah? Could you tell Oprah, "Hey, it'll be a pretty fun party, but don't get your hopes up," while secretly planning to blow her away? This is the exact scenario Debbie Lilly has been faced with multiple times. She has hosted a number of high-profile events for Oprah, including her 50th birthday celebration on live TV, which included guest appearances from none other than John Travolta and Tina Turner. In these stakes, that phrase goes out the window, says Lilly. However, the value of surprise persists. It's amazing how powerful small, surprising gestures can be. Having someone show up to your table at an event with something thoughtful or surprising, or being surprised by a locally made gift bag. Lilly and her team were behind perhaps one of the most quoted television events of all time, Oprah's massive car giveaway in 2004. You get a car, and you get a car. Everybody gets a car. Even if you've seen it countless times before, it's hard not to be swept up in the emotion. The reason? Joy, anticipation, and surprise are built in and maximized at every opportunity. First, Oprah randomly selects 11 people from the audience to come join her on stage, under the ruse that they are getting special recognition for being teachers. If the event had ended right there, these 11 people would have gone home happy with just that. However, Oprah was just getting started. I've been lying to you, she tells them. I admit right here and now. All of you share a wildest dream. All of you are in desperate need of, cue the dopamine, a brand new car. The 11 people are over the moon, and the audience erupts in applause and joy, sharing in their delight. But this was just the warm-up act. After the crowd calms down, Oprah reveals that she is lying again, telling the audience that there is one more car to give away. The crowd hums and gasps in anticipation. Now Debbie's team springs into action. They go through the aisles, passing out small silver boxes tied with bows as Oprah explains, "Don't open it now, but in one of these boxes is a key to the final Pontiac G6. The anticipation builds as every member of the crowd wonders, could I be the one? Oprah literally cues a drum roll, more dopamine, then tells the audience to open them up. Of course, the surprise is that every box contains the key. Each person opening the box thinks they are the winner. Each person is not only happy to be getting a G6, but also experiencing a sense of surprise and feeling special that they, out of everyone in the audience, were the lucky random winners. With everyone experiencing this special injection of random, personalized pleasure, the collective audience is an eruption of pure joy. Then slowly, people begin to look around and see that everyone is holding a pair of keys. And then Oprah delivers her famous line, "You get a car, and you get a car. Everyone gets a car." Possibly the only thing better than being the lucky winner of a car is to feel this final jolt of pleasure. The feeling of knowing in that moment that you're part of a once-in-a-generation moment in TV history. It's worth reflecting on just how important this incredible layering of pleasure is. Had Oprah come into the studio and immediately announced, "You get a car, and you get a car, everyone gets a car," this would no doubt have resulted in an incredibly happy audience. But by layering in the surprise and maximizing the dopaminergic response, the show took the experience to an almost otherworldly level. Even in situations where expectations are naturally high, as in a car giveaway on Oprah, surprise can still be incorporated into the design. Great event designers know this intuitively. An unexpected gift is a great start, but it isn't just the gift that matters. It's how the gift is given. Not only do we enjoy pleasures more when they're unexpected, but the repeated violation of our expectations, in other words, randomness, significantly impacts our behavior. Randomness and behavior. The importance of randomness in driving behavior was first uncovered in the 1960s by the seminal research of behavioral psychologist Michael Zeiler, who compared how pigeons respond differently to variations in the timing of rewards. Like dogs, pigeons are quick learners. If they peck on a lever and food comes out, they will quickly pick up on this and do it again and again. Pigeons have nearly insatiable appetites, so simple kernels of corn make for a profound reward. In Zeiler's experiment, the pigeons were allowed to pick freely between two levers. One lever consistently gave them food each and every time they pressed it. Pressing the other lever also provided food, but only 50 to 70% of the time and at unpredictable intervals. The results seem easy to predict. Naturally, pigeons should select the option that gives them a tasty treat each and every time. But the pigeons' vote was decisive. They spent almost twice as long pecking when the reward was not predictable. This result has been replicated hundreds of times across a variety of species, including us humble humans. And the results are amazingly consistent. We're eerily drawn to inconsistency. When it comes to reinforcing a behavior, a variable reward schedule, you know a reward is coming at some point, but you don't know when, is much more potent than a consistent reward schedule. If we find something enjoyable, why would we want it more when it's inconsistent? As we saw last chapter in Greg Burns's juice squirting experiments, inconsistency is just more pleasurable, on the level of the brain, than consistency is. Recall that anticipation itself is rewarding, and so is that moment when, our expectations lowered by inconsistency, we are surprised by pleasure. Is the juice going to come now? How about now? Now? Ah, finally! This high level of variability also compels us to return again and again. When we can't predict what's going to happen next in response to an action we take, we're more likely to repeat that action, in an unconscious effort to understand this elusive relationship. It creates compulsive behavior, what some, including us, for the purposes of this chapter, would call addiction. The peculiar activity of dopamine is why the floors of Vegas casinos are stocked full of hopeful slot machine enthusiasts. Despite their minimal gains over time, like the pigeons in Zeiler's experiment, gamblers pull lever after lever or push button after button in the dopamine-lubricated hope that this time they'll get the big payout. In terms of addiction, social media platforms have more in common with gambling than, say, nicotine. Each time we visit our Facebook news feed, we pull the lever on the social media slot machine. We anticipate that doing so will be generally rewarding, that we'll see a new video, find out our friend is getting married, and so forth. But the degree of pleasure we receive is unpredictable and random. Every post doesn't blow our minds. Some posts are boring, others are annoying, and some are even offensive. Nonetheless, we keep scrolling because we feel as if the sweet reward might be just beyond the next post. Sean Parker, an early Facebook investor and its first president, played by Justin Timberlake in the movie The Social Network, understands this all too well. Facebook designed for the activity of dopamine in the user experience. According to Parker, we need to sort of give you a little dopamine hit every once in a while because someone liked or commented on a photo or a post or whatever. Because the experience is dynamic and we never know when or from where the pleasure is coming, we keep returning again and again. Just like Zeiler's pigeons, the variability keeps us guessing, which keeps our dopamine levels in constant flux. The evil genius of the newsfeed. The newsfeed is so powerful and so familiar these days that it's difficult to imagine a world without it. As the infamous origin story goes, Facebook was launched as a Harvard-only networking site in 2004, and slowly branched out to other colleges and universities before eventually becoming available to everyone. Even in its early days, Facebook was an agile platform that evolved quickly. Your personal profile page changed and became more refined through time as Facebook adopted a barrage of new features. First, the ability to blog. Next, to add photos. And then to tag friends. Facebook's user growth was healthy, accruing its 1 millionth user before the end of 2004, less than a year after its initial rollout to Harvard students. Only 2 years later, Facebook was estimated to be worth over $1 billion. Despite this rapid evolution, the structure of the site itself was still much simpler than it is now, consisting only of personal pages, your wall. This made for a very different user experience. The social element was protracted. You could friend and unfriend at will, but if you wanted to see what a friend was up to, you had to actually visit their individual page and scroll their feed, like a barbarian. Life before the news feed in Facebookville, population 10 million, was simple. A poke here, a poke there. If you were really lucky, someone would write on your wall. On September 6, 2006, everything changed. Facebook made its most significant change to date when the company launched the news feed, an expression of Mark Zuckerberg's vision of Facebook as a juiced-up form of transparent social email. Zuckerberg himself had predicted the future of the Internet would be a set of curated streams. The news feed, the first real social stream, embodied this concept. Surely, Facebook citizens loved it, right? The reaction was universally negative, causing an upheaval of angry responses. Rushi Songwi, the product manager behind the newsfeed, was burned at the digital stake. Following the newsfeed launch, the fastest-growing Facebook group was Rushi is the Devil. The morning after the launch, angry reporters and users actually gathered outside the Facebook headquarters in Menlo Park in protest. Despite the rancor, An analysis of user time on the site revealed something remarkable. While feedback was almost completely negative, people were spending more time on Facebook than ever. Sangui herself documented this in her own Facebook status, emphasis added. A lot of folks wanted us to shut Newsfeed down, and most other companies would have done precisely that, especially if 10% of their users threatened to boycott the product. But we didn't. Newsfeed was actually working. Amidst all the chaos, all the outrage, we noticed something unusual. Even though everyone claimed they hated it, engagement had doubled. That's right. User engagement doubled. Variable reinforcement, like with Zeiler's pigeons, had officially arrived on social media. As users got more used to Newsfeed, the negative hysteria slowed, and engagement and user activity only accelerated. With every new update, Facebook began to shape the newsfeed into what it is today, a masterpiece of attention hacking. In 2009, the Facebook newsfeed got an update that killed chronological order. Instead of Father Time, a new magical algorithm began deciding which posts you would see and when. The update was a major win for randomness, as it took away the last piece of control users had over posts, the order in which they were seen. The newsfeed model, where platforms deliver an experience that is generally pleasurable and yet variable in its delivery of that pleasure, is now commonplace in the world of social media. Instagram and Snapchat employ something almost identical. Even LinkedIn, long thought of as the old, boring, buttoned-up social media platform, implemented a newsfeed to monumentally increase its users' time on site. A 2012 study by Adweek found that the average LinkedIn user spent a laughable 12 minutes on the site every month. After it implemented a newsfeed the following year, its engagement shot up over 45%, with almost half of users spending over 2 hours a week on the site. The feeling of unfinishedness. Another way to look at the potency of pleasure delivery in driving behavior is through the psychology of completeness. Human beings have a natural mental drive for completeness. Imagine your best friend telling you a suspenseful story, only to walk away right before the ending. You'd be understandably dissatisfied, and it would be difficult to focus on anything else until you finally got that resolution. This fixation on things left unfinished is referred to as the Zeigarnik effect. Named after its discoverer, Lithuanian psychologist Bluma Zeigarnik, it states that once we become engrossed in something and focused on completing it, we hate being interrupted. In instances when we are unable to finish what we're doing and get the resolution we crave, our behavior is affected in a very specific way. The discomfort of the unfinished task captures and draws our attention until we can find closure. We get stressed, we fixate on the task, and our memory for where we left off is intensified. Some of the early demonstrations of the Zeigarnik effect were in a classroom setting related to memory. When students are given the task of memorizing a list of words but are interrupted halfway through by another task, they remember the words far better than if they'd been able to complete their memorization. Furthermore, regardless of how boring the task is to them initially, interrupted students express a strong desire to complete it as soon as they are given the chance. The human nature is to finish what we start, and if we cannot, we experience discomfort. This creates an unmet need we feel compelled to meet at the earliest opportunity. The platforms in the attention economy are keen on creating that unmet need, providing us with a drive to continue in search of a completion that simply never comes. Because the longer you spend in an insatiable search for completion, the more money you generate for these platforms. Zeigarnik in the world of clickbait content. Using the Zeigarnik effect to keep consumers' attention has been taken to an extreme in the Addiction 2.0 era, but its use isn't new. Local TV news broadcasts have used it for decades to keep you coming back after a commercial break with phrases like, "How one resident became best friends with a drone." That and more after the break. Sports news shows like SportsCenter use asking a trivia question before a commercial break the same way. The trivia question without an answer is classic Zeigarnik. By leaving you with these cliffhangers, they increase the chances you'll stay tuned. Netflix's post-play feature employs a particularly strong dose of the Z. With the introduction of post-play, walking away after watching the first episode of Stranger Things feels as if you're leaving in the middle of a seamless 8-hour movie. But Game of Thrones, the hit HBO show based on George R.R. Martin's series of novels, did a Zeigarnik even without the post-play. How? It had many developing storylines covering dozens of characters. The sheer scale of unfinishedness kept viewers and readers begging for more. Perhaps the master of the large-scale Zeigarnik effect in storytelling is Marvel Studios' Marvel Cinematic Universe, MCU, which as of late 2019 is the highest-grossing movie franchise of all time, with $22.8 billion and growing in sales from the films alone. The Zeigarnik effect is triggered not only by the film's mid-credit and end-credit scenes, but by the interweaving of a universal storyline among its, to date, 23 separate films with 32 superhero characters. The sheer scale of characters, plots, subplots, and sub-subplots provide a healthy dose of unfinishedness that can only be sated with a new Marvel film. So, while use of the Zeigarnik effect predates modern technology, today's digital marketing has turned it into an art form. Today's clickbait articles use a teaser format, snippets of information that create a need for resolution, as bait to encourage site visitors to, well, click. It is unlikely the average web surfer has heard of Outbrain or Taboola, but they have definitely seen the sponsored content these companies are responsible for placing at the bottom of web articles. What she looks like now will amaze you. Sound familiar? Oh, never mind how inappropriate such an article might be, placed under an article on the Syrian civil war. Outbrain and Taboola are the silent giants of this kind of sponsored content ad, which blatantly abuse the Zeigarnik effect. 3 Amsterdam locals walk into a J. Crew shoot. Here's why guys are obsessed with this underwear. In 2014, Time Inc. signed a deal with Outbrain worth $100 million. CNN, Bleacher Report, Slate, and ESPN are all clients of Outbrain. At the time of writing, Taboola and Outbrain are exploring a merger that would set their value at over $1 billion. Hate them all you want, Mr. and Miss Web Surfer, but the awkward hot baseball wives ad under that serious story isn't going anywhere. There's another company well known for using the Zeigarnik effect to deliver what most journalists would call pseudo-news. BuzzFeed. It's hard to argue with their results. 9 billion monthly content views, 250 million unique monthly visitors, and a valuation of $1.7 billion. How they do it? Their article titles are mini Zeigarnik cliffhangers meant to induce a sense of unfinishedness that only clicking on the article can resolve. Journalistic integrity be damned. Just try and resist these headlines. 24 times Tom Hardy ruined other men for you. This might be the scariest trail in the world, but you'll never guess where. Unbelievable. Can't stop, won't stop? Clickbait ads work by creating a sense of incompleteness, which then compels us to click on them to reach resolution. However, once we click, that resolution is generally provided. That's not the case with today's online platforms, especially social media. Their addictive technology works by denying us completion, creating an ongoing need to return to it for that ever-elusive resolution. This is why it's physically difficult to pull yourself away from the infinite scrolling of Instagram and Facebook. By failing to provide any clear end, these apps effectively put you, the user, in a box of unfinishedness. Welcome to digital hell. Or more accurately, welcome to Zeigarnik purgatory, where the seeds of compulsive behavior are planted. In everyday life, we're generally able to accommodate our need for closure by dividing our lives into satisfying chunks. When we're reading a book, we can finish the chapter we're on before leaving the cafe. And when we're at work, we can finish the email we're writing before going out for our lunch break. But whether it's swipe after swipe on Tinder or a scroll down into an endless news feed, the user experience has no psychological stopping points, no milestones, nor a finish line, after which the user can walk away saying, Okay, I've completed that. In the case of the bottomless news feed, we never feel satisfied because there is no point at which we feel we've completed our task. The continuous scroll model, as it is known in the industry, has become popular beyond just social media. Time.com, for example, revamped their website in 2015 to include a continuous scroll interface. Their engagement improved almost immediately. The bounce rate, the percentage of visitors who leave the site after viewing only one page, dropped 15%. Bleacher Report achieved a similar reduction in bounce rate when they killed their traditional front page and replaced it with an infinite scroll design. In 2012, one of the largest digital media companies, Mashable, which covers pop and tech news, redesigned their website for both mobile and desktop to show news articles in a bottomless stream of tiles. Go to Mashable.com and try to get to the bottom of the page. Just don't hold your breath. If the visual of scrolling tiles feels familiar, you've likely spent some time on Pinterest. Pinterest serves up images with a particularly potent combination of randomness and the Zeigarnik effect. Perfectly sized and spaced square tiles are presented for your viewing pleasure in a seemingly endless stream. No wonder Pinterest was the fastest site in web history to hit 10 million users, was able to go public so quickly, and is currently valued at almost $13 billion. Next time you're on your favorite website or app, check to see if it has a traditional homepage, or an endless river of content designed to maximize the Zeigarnik effect. Digital well-being. Thanks to our understanding of variable reinforcement and the Zeigarnik effect, we can see how online platforms inspire the behavior they do and have risen to become some of the most profitable and powerful companies in the world. But where do we go from here? Are we doomed to spend increasingly greater amounts of time scrolling through Instagram and swiping through Snapchat? This is a question Tristan Harris has thought a lot about. Harris, 33, is an outspoken critic of modern platforms hijacking our attention and has been described as the closest thing Silicon Valley has to a conscience. Harris understands the workings of the attention economy firsthand. He launched an app in 2012 that installed pop-up advertisements on a number of prominent web platforms. The company was acquired by Google shortly after, and Harris was hired to help integrate it into Google's advertising product portfolio. Harris was in Silicon Valley heaven, which for most people would be a dream come true. Harris isn't most people. He couldn't shake the feeling that there was something underhanded about his industry. Fresh off a weekend at Burning Man, he finally broke and had his Jerry Maguire moment. He produced a 141 slide deck, released in 2013, outlining the responsibility large tech companies have to foster an ethical approach to attention, to design platforms that don't merely hook users, but also consider their long-term well-being. The document quickly spread to over 5,000 Google employees, up to and including C-level management. To Harris's amazement, he wasn't fired. Instead, he got a face-to-face meeting with CEO Larry Page and was given the formal title Chief Ethicist. Harris has urged technology companies to adopt ethical design principles, but he has also urged consumers to be more vigilant against the temptations and compulsions those companies create. He's teamed up with Joe Edelman, founder of the company that publishes the Moment app, to form the nonprofit group Time Well Spent. The idea behind Time Well Spent is to bring attention to, attention. More specifically, it aims to empower technology users against mindless and compulsive behavior. The suggestions are deceptively simple, but effective. Turn off app notifications, customize your smartphone home screen, and build a daily routine that doesn't start and end with looking at a screen. They also encourage use of a wide range of desktop and mobile applications to monitor the amount of time spent on common platforms, in the hope that showing users just how long they are spending on particular sites will curb usage. Time Well Spent has gained a following, and a number of tech founders have taken Tristan Harris and Facebook investor Sean Parker's lead in coming out against the products they helped create. Lauren Brichter, the designer of the slot machine-like pull-down-to-refresh mechanism for mobile devices, said, "Pull to refresh is addictive. Twitter is addictive. These are not good things. When I was working on them, it was not something I was mature enough to think about. I'm not saying I'm mature now, but I'm a little bit more mature, and I regret the downsides. Nearly a decade after Facebook's introduction of the news feed, the public began catching on to how potent technological platforms had become. The dam finally broke in 2018. Perhaps it was the Stanford study that suggested taking pictures with a smartphone actually reduced the photographer's ability to form memories of what they were viewing. Or the Penn State study that showed a strong link between social media addiction and depression among adolescents. Or it could have been the increasing number of tech founders and pioneers voicing their concerns, a chorus that finally became too loud and disturbing to ignore. Whatever the reason, 2018 was a turning point in the national consciousness of tech addiction. People looked up from their phones and realized their technology was making them addicted and miserable. The market has been quick to respond to this epiphany. In addition to Moment, perhaps the pioneer of digital detox, several other commercial tools are now available that help provide users with increased awareness and autonomy. Los Angeles-based startup Boundless Mind, for example, aims to harness the power of addictive technology to steer people toward healthier habits. We're talking about mind control. Oh my God, right? Co-founder Ramsey Brown told Time.com. But what if we sell you those mind control tools to help people get off opioids, or to communicate with each other on a more meaningful level? Why can't we engineer your brain to be who you want to be? Outside of digital solutions, probably the most extreme reflection of technology's addictive hold is the proliferation of digital rehab facilities. These come in a variety of forms, from resorts that encourage travelers to disconnect to reconnect, or that offer perks to customers who are able to abstain from their phones for a given duration, all the way to legitimate digital rehabilitation centers. These are exactly what they sound like: physical housing, usually isolated in rural areas, that serve as recovery facilities. Phones, laptops, tablets, and other digital devices are strictly forbidden and must be surrendered at check-in. Washington-based Restart, for example, offers 6- and 10-week programs and has several full-time addiction counselors on staff. At the time of writing, Facebook has yet to take initiative for driving responsible use of its platform. However, the other tech giants, Apple and Google, responded to the conversation about responsible tech usage in 2018 by making digital well-being apps available in their respective smartphones, the iPhone and the Pixel. The apps are similar, with the iPhone version having the edge in terms of amount of usage data provided. It shows the user which apps take up most of their time, as well as how many notifications the user averages a day and from which apps. Pessimist Pete might say these smartphone apps are branded Band-Aids. You'd have a point. Surely you've seen, while driving, those speed-sensing road signs, "Your speed is 47 miles per hour," that nudge you to slow down. These signs only work because, in our society, 1, we agree that speeding is bad and has consequences for the safety of the driver and others. 2, if you speed, you face legal and financial consequences. Digital well-being apps are like putting a speed-sensing road sign in a country where people don't believe speeding is bad and have zero laws against it. Sure, it may slow a handful of people down, but most of the population will blow right past it. When it comes to tech usage, the general public is still largely unaware of how addictive these design elements are, while lawmakers are only now figuring out that Apple, not Google, makes the iPhone. The only people aware of the impact are the people whose financial livelihoods our habitual app use funds. Ultimately, time will have to tell if digital well-being apps can be effective. As it stands, making money in the current digital landscape means capturing attention. Companies that have successfully done this have flourished financially. Making your product less addictive is tantamount to making your product less profitable. Every minute less the average consumer spends on your platform, the less revenue you generate. And at least currently, consumers aren't demanding or willing to pay for addiction-free versions. Until consumers value their time and well-being enough to overcome the allure of these free, addictive platforms, it's difficult for this business model to truly shift. While the likes of Google and Apple can literally afford to sacrifice immediate goals like time on site in an effort to come across as more ethical than their competitors, other Smaller brands operating within the attention economy either cannot or will not. And if Google or Alphabet, their holding company, or Apple begin to lose market space to these competitors over time, their shareholders may persuade them to reconsider. Consumers have a choice: pay with money or pay with attention. So far, we have defaulted to attention. Here's hoping we go back to good old dollars. The future of addictive technologies. Addiction isn't simply about dependence on a physical product. Digitally, addiction is engagement, the focused application of our attention. We have age limits for things like gambling because we know it can lead to compulsive behavior. Yet no such restrictions exist for social media. It doesn't even come with a parental advisory like music and film do. As more and more of Earth's population starts using these platforms, the price of our attention for advertisers will only increase, and these platforms will only become more adept at hijacking our attention. As Harris has said, there's a whole system that's much more powerful than us, and it's only going to get stronger. Our screens are addictive enough in 2 dimensions. Now virtual reality and augmented reality are beginning to supercharge engagement in 3D and beyond. Addiction 3.0 will use VR and AR to enable deeper and more compelling experiences. It is no surprise Facebook spent $2 billion to purchase Oculus Rift, a virtual reality video game system, or that venture capital investments of nearly as much, $1.9 billion, were made in VR and AR startups in 2016 alone. And if the AR phenomenon Pokemon Go, which had 100 million downloads in the summer of 2016, is any indication, we are only scratching the surface of AR's potential to transform the attention economy. It's hard to imagine a world in which people wake up tomorrow and do not feel compelled by technology and online platforms. It is equally hard to imagine a world in which massive technology companies are willing to forego billions in advertising revenue by making their platforms less addictive. Technology products are unique in their lack of transparency. You can't pick them up and assess their parts and how they work the way you can with, say, a pair of shoes. The business models of products in this sphere are equally shrouded in obscurity. If you're shopping for a deal on pairs of shoes, buy one get one means what it says. If you're shopping for tech products, free never actually means free. These are businesses after all, and their products, especially the free ones, only succeed if they can alter our attention and behavior to align with their interests. Fueled by technological advancement, the battle over our attention will only intensify in the coming years. The stakes could not be higher. Time and conscious attention are the most precious resources we have, and how we choose to invest them dictates how we live our lives. Some of the world's most ancient philosophers, from the Buddha to Socrates, admonished us to treat these resources with care, to remain vigilant in our focus, and not to give in to life's distractions. Aristotle, for instance, famously worried that the advent of writing would lead us astray by taking over our thoughts and consuming our valuable attention. One can only imagine how he would react to the potency of Tinder. Ultimately, it may be wise to heed the words of Epictetus, the philosopher and Stoic. You become what you give your attention to.